Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are about to begin the 2052 season, which will be our fourth season as general manager of these Rockies. We've made the playoffs each of the last two seasons, but we've gone 0-5 in our two playoff series. That said, we made a ton of additions to the team this offseason that we think will have a big impact, and our goal this year is certainly to win a World Series championship. But before we begin pursuit of that title, just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First, just in response to some comments in our last episode that was posted, just want to be clear with all viewers that sometimes when I post an episode, I've already got the next episode that follows that one prepared. So I appreciate all of the comments from people down below and certainly have learned a lot from the thoughts of you who are watching right now and many other viewers over the last couple of years with the comments on my episodes. Sometimes those can influence my behavior in the next episode, sometimes they can't, but do sincerely appreciate them since I think they definitely help me make me a better player of the game by hearing different ideas and different approaches from all of you, including the frequent commenters, and you all know who you are. And even more importantly than that, I think they help the people who watch these episodes and don't comment by me either becoming a better player or, more importantly, them reading the ideas that you put down there in the comments as to how to build a team differently and oftentimes more effectively than I do. So hope that interaction continues. Second housekeeping issue is much more interesting and much more exciting, and that's that it's Saturday morning as I'm taping this episode. It should be Saturday morning when I post this episode, at least in the East Coast of the United States, when I finally get this completed. And a couple of days ago, OOTP Developments released their trailer for OOTP 24. So we've got a new version of the game coming in about a month that I'm really excited about. So that means that we've probably only got about a month of episodes left for the Rockies. At this point, I am heading into my 31st season of this playthrough here. You can see we started in 2022 with the Royals, 17 years there, 11 years with the Pirates, and now starting the fourth season with the Rockies. So we've got 30 years on the books at this point, averaged a little over 90, close to 91 wins a year, actually 92 wins a year, which is pretty good. So yeah, it looks like our average record is about 92 and 70. We've made the playoffs 23 times, won 5 World Series, but let's be honest, it's been 15 seasons since we won a World Series. Our last one was 2036 with the Royals. Did go to 2 World Series with the Pirates and lose. And the goal this year is to break that long stretch of ultimate failure in terms of how we played in this game. But with just about a month left, my goal is to get several more seasons in with the Rockies done. So that's probably going to increase the probability that I stack up a couple episodes at a time when my work and personal life schedules allow, just because I do want to try to play as many seasons with the Rockies. And certainly add at least one more title and hopefully multiple titles before we move on to a new challenge in OOTP 24. And if you have some thoughts on what would be interesting in OOTP 24, share those down below in the comment section also, please. I've got a couple ideas, but could definitely use some input. But as those of you who have watched frequently know, I'm going to do what I am going to do regardless. But I do like getting ideas from people, and sometimes they influence my decisions. Sometimes they just give me something interesting to think about, and I still go and do what I'm going to do. So with that said, the season is about to begin. We'll take a quick look at the highlights from the off-season. Start with our daily players first, because there wasn't too much different here. We made a trade for Tony Caceres, who we brought on board as a utility infielder. Think he's competent at playing infield positions, has a respectable-ish major league bat, and he's an Iron Man as far as his injury proneness. So think that he could be a good utility infielder for us. And then we also picked up the youngster Bobby Mata in the Rule 5 draft. 22-year-old, has never played above A ball, so he's kind of the 26th man on our roster. But we like his personality, like the fact that he's got some speed, and looks like a really good contact hitter, potentially with gap power and speed that could be slapping a bunch of doubles and triples all around Coors Field. Like that he's durable. He's definitely a fourth or fifth outfielder for us this year. You can see we have kind of shoehorned him into the lineup as our DH against left-handers just to get him some at-bats. Big losses for the team. Jamel Cohen, veteran first baseman, who had spent 11 years in Colorado. And Uncle Nakahara, left fielder, another veteran who had been with us for the last 3 years, previously was on our team in Pittsburgh. Those are the two departures this offseason. I guess the other really big departure is our former starting catcher, Mr. Gonzalez. But we were kind of prepared for his departure. We traded for Alex Alvarez before the trade deadline last year, thinking that he was a much better defensive catcher with at least a little bit of pop. And he certainly showed that for us last year, hitting .281 with 9 homers and 160 at-bats as a backup, but a backup who got a fair amount of duty after we brought him over. One other player to mention as far as our offense is first baseman Adam Fields was a Rule 5 pick about a year and a half ago. This is the guy who we brought on board that we think can hopefully replace most of what Jamel Cohen gave us. Because with the losses of Cohen, Gonzalez, and Nakahara, I think it's a fair assessment that our offense may not be quite as good as it was last year, and we're going to need Fields to really step things up to ensure that we're as close to last year's offense as possible. The .280 average he put up is kind of the same range that Cohen was in, but the 4 homers and 157 at-bats, probably the pace of those needs to be more than doubled playing in Colorado to be giving us what Cohen was giving us in terms of home run production. Certainly seems like Fields could do that. So we're cautiously optimistic that the offense will still be excellent. Certainly expect that we're going to be first in the National League in runs scored once again, largely by virtue of playing in Coors, but also with the fact that we do have some dynamic offensive players in Elijah Moore, Robbie Carrillo, and Bobby Perez on this team. So although the offense may be a little worse than last year, we're still pretty confident that we're going to score some runs. Now turning to our pitching staff, and this is where we think we should be much better due to 3 key additions. One is Ricky Rios, who was a closer with us back in our Pittsburgh days. Going to turn 35 during this season, but an extreme ground baller, great movement on his pitches, and certainly has a pretty stellar record as a major league closer with 283 saves over the course of his career. He's led the league in saves 3 times, 132 ERA plus, 75 FIP minus, 318 SIERA. 4-time All-Star, as you can see. I think this is probably still largely a lateral move for us. We had Omar Jones as our closer last year who was looking for crazy money. So we let him go and got the draft pick compensation after we gave him a qualifying offer, but think that at the very least Rio should be able to put up a very similar season to what we got from Jones last year. But then we do have 2 players that we believe will be important additions to our pitching staff, and they're both starters. First is Jose Vasquez, who's slotted in as our number 3 starter. We picked him up in a trade with the Padres. He's going to turn 28 years old shortly. He's been in the majors for 3 full seasons, plus part of a 4th. So he's at the point where he's starting to make some money, and we actually signed him to an extension where he's going to make some real money. So we bought out his 3 arbitration years and we have the option to have bought out 3 of his free agent years. But he is a pitcher who over the course of his career has been well above average as a starter. You can see 14-6, 13-10, 13-9 records with the Padres. Was not cheap to acquire him. Had to give up Willis Lopez, who was a first-round talent that we picked in the second round of the draft about a year and a half ago. And then Juan Corona, who's also a decent starting pitching prospect, but just don't think that with his fly ball tendencies, he's going to be incredibly effective in cores, and he may end up being a really good reliever rather than a starter. But to bring on Vasquez, another extreme ground ball pitcher with ground baller tendencies, great movement on his pitches, we think that he can potentially be a really great asset for us in cores for, at this point, potentially the next 6+ seasons. And we view Vasquez as a definite upgrade to our rotation. He's basically taken over the kind of third starter role that Jesus Galindo had often been in the last couple of years. We traded away Galindo to pick up Mr. Rios, but believe that Vasquez is an upgrade on Galindo also. So feel like Vasquez gets the starting rotation younger, certainly, as the youngest guy in our rotation by 5 years at this point. And he also gives us an upgrade to the starting rotation. So Rios probably a lateral move, Vasquez a modest upgrade. And then we have a huge upgrade to talk about with the number 1 pitcher in our rotation. And honestly, when we think about last year, we had Alvarado, Vargas, Toledo, as well as Galindo, who we were just mentioning as our top 4. So with Vasquez on board, basically, we've slotted our 1 through 4 pitchers from last season into 2 through 5 roles. So you can argue that Rogelio Loera, who we brought on with a huge free agent deal, who's now our number 1 starter, is in a way replacing the 5th starter in our rotation, which is just a massive upgrade because you can see that Mr. Loera has won a ton of hardware over the course of his career. And I do like the mention, I think, in comments an episode or 2 ago by, I think it was Patrick DeBonis, that Rogelio's nickname should be Low ERA because over the course of his career, he has been one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history, closing in on 6,000 career strikeouts, over 3,700 innings, 272 games won. So if he's healthy for us, certainly should get to 6,000 strikeouts this year and has potential in the next 2 or 3 seasons to also get to 300 career wins. He's got a 3 ERA for his career, an insane 128.6 WAR. He's going to turn 40 this season, which would definitely scare me and does scare me a bit. But you look at what he's done, and he led the American League in pitcher WAR each of the last 2 seasons. Won an ERA title the year before last, led the league in WHIP, has led the league in FIP minus both seasons. He's normal in terms of his injury proneness, but the opportunity to add perhaps the greatest pitcher in baseball history to our pitching staff, given that we are all in to win, was just something we could not say no to, given that we had the money to make it happen. Signed him to a 3-year deal with a team option for us on the 3rd year. I'm going to make $40 million this year and then $36 each of the next 2 years potentially for that 3rd season. So we should have him possibly over the rest of his career, but certainly think he's another ground baller with extreme ground ball tendencies, great movement on his pitches, and then clearly some of the best stuff that's ever been around in baseball history with exceptional changeup, a great cutter, and a well above average splitter in his arsenal. So we are expecting him to be a huge part of what this team hopes to achieve this season and think that that addition is what hopefully will really help push this team from a team that's been a 96 and 97 win club that's made the playoffs to hopefully being a 100-win team that can get into the World Series and hopefully ultimately win a World Series championship. Before the season gets started, we'll take a look at the preseason predictions. And yeah, people like the Rockies. At least in this simulation, we are a 107 win team, which is by 4 over the Marlins, the most in all of baseball. Clearly, it's just one simulation, but I'm certainly expecting this team to win over 100 games, hopefully be in the running for the best record in baseball, and most importantly, hopefully make a long postseason run. You can see we're expecting Bobby Perez, Elijah Moore, and Robbie Carrillo, the 3 guys that I mentioned, as our 3 key offensive players. At least through this run through the simulation, they all had big years, and they all played 154 or more games. We would certainly sign up for that. And then it looks like expecting Loera to thrive in Colorado, a 2.95 ERA with 15 wins, 238 strikeouts. We would certainly take that season. And Dave Alvarado, who was our number 1 starter till we brought on Loera, even though we missed him in the playoffs last year, also expected to have a real nice season as far as this simulation. So the expectations for the Rockies are quite high, and it's time to get the 2052 season underway and see if we can meet and maybe even exceed some of those expectations. One last thing I forgot to mention as we get off to an inauspicious start with a 6-1 loss to the Giants on the road on opening day. At the end of spring training, over the last 3 days between the end of our last episode and this episode, we did make an offer to shortstop Jordan Casares for a extension. I think that defense at shortstop, given the number of ground ballers that we have on our pitching staff, was just critical to keep on board, even if we're not expecting him to be as productive offensively as he was last year in his debut with the club when he hit .317. We had brought him on board, quite honestly, to be a utility infielder, but felt like that glove was so important that after a slow start last year, we put him into the lineup at shortstop and have kept him there. And the numbers were not that bad. Average of $6 million a year for 4 years with a team option for us in the final season. So feel that the addition of Casares will likely stabilize, particularly defensively, that shortstop position for us the next few years, which is going to be critical with all of the extreme ground ball and ground ball tendency pitchers we have on our staff. And we also made an offer to one other player, Juan Vargas, the veteran starter, who's now kind of a 4th or 5th starter for us with the talent that we've added to this rotation. I do worry a bit. He's going to turn 38 before next season starts, but another extreme ground baller with good movement on his pitches, good in the clubhouse. I do worry, though, that splitter is not as effective as it's been in the past, and we may end up needing to move him into the bullpen over the next couple years. But with the amount that we offered, you can see here, I think it's $2.8 million a year that we averaged over 3 years, and the 3rd year is going to be a team option. Felt like even if we have to turn him into a lefty bullpen arm over the next couple of years, the salary is not going to be so egregious that it's going to hurt us. And if he does get old quickly and have a bunch of injuries, the salary, again, is not so big that it's going to hurt us. You can see Loera, rough start, and it wasn't even Colorado, 10-12 ERA in his first year. One thing that we are focusing on, and have gotten comments about this over the last couple of days, we do have 4 lefties in our rotation right now and only 2 lefties in the bullpen. I think in a perfect world, I'd prefer to have a more even mix, a second right-hander in the rotation, because I really like our rotation right now. There's no immediate impetus for me to make a change, but certainly will keep an eye out if there's any right-handed high-quality starting pitchers available that we could add to the team. And clearly, if we get into a situation where one of the big arms does have a serious injury, would likely be looking to add a right-handed starter rather than a left-handed starter, just to balance out the rotation a little bit more. And part of that, thinking longer with the offer that we made to Mr. Vargas, is if we do, over the next season or two bring on a big-time right-handed starting pitcher. Vargas, if he deteriorates a little bit, could still probably be pretty effective in the pen, and with a potential third left-handed arm in the bullpen would give us a little bit more balance out there. And fortunately, the month of March is over. Wasn't a great start for us in that 4-game series that we did have against the Giants. You can see we lost the first 3 games of the year in San Francisco. Finally did beat them yesterday to get our first victory of the year. And now the month of April begins, and we've got the Dodgers. Looks like we're also going to have the Padres in the division this month. But a lot of out-of-division games for us after that first 7 of the year between the Giants and the Dodgers. Much more mixed schedule, so we're going to have a lot of games against NL West rivals later in the year, but still hope that we get off to a pretty fast start here in the month of April. And we did just win another game to get back to 2-3. We also got Vargas signed, so good to have a shortstop and a back of the rotation starter / potential reliever both locked up at what I think are pretty reasonable deals. Fan interest still well over 100. Going to have some home games coming up soon, so we'll see how we do in terms of attendance with our somewhat higher ticket prices at the start of this season than we had average last year. And we've simmed ahead to mid-April, and after that 0-3 start, we're 10-4 since then. So kind of playing the type of baseball more like we would have expected at the start of the year. Still 2.5 back in the division, but obviously it is very early going right now. Actually, our 4th in the division right now, though. But actually, we're tied for 2nd in the optimistic way, even though we've played 2 more games than both the Diamondbacks and the Padres. We're all 2.5 back, but they each have a couple games in hand on us. The Dodgers off to a really good start. The Giants, who are the team that took 3 out of 4 against us, are actually in last place. You can see Carrillo continuing to rake, which is nice. And Loera has bounced back, 2-2 record with a 4.50 ERA, but 39 strikeouts in 24 innings and leading the league in pitcher WAR already. So good to see that. Bad news is our great young right fielder going to be out for 6 weeks with back spasms. Was the Rookie of the Year winner last year and also an All-Star. Off to a bit of a slow start this year, hitting just .222 with 3 homers and 54 at-bats. But certainly, to use my catchphrase, not optimal that we will be without Bobby Perez for the next month and a half or so. But hopefully it's an injury that we can overcome. And at the very least, it will mean that a couple of those former Rule 5 acquisitions, Bobby Mata from this year and Manlio Milinhos from a couple of years ago, will get a little more playing time this year, at least over the next 6 weeks or so, with Perez off the roster. And it's kind of interesting, the guy that we brought up to replace Perez on the roster, Jose Brito, who is another one of our Rule 5 picks. So between Brito, Mata, and Milinhos, we've picked a Rule 5 guy that we've ended up keeping in each of the 4 seasons that we've been playing this playthrough. And 3 of the 4 guys are now on our Major League roster, and they all should stand to get a little bit of extra playing time from the injury to Bobby Perez. And another week in the books. Rockies playing really good ball, 15-8. Still a game and a half behind now, but certainly think if we keep playing at a 6:52 pace, we will be fine as far as our playoff positioning. The great Elijah Moore, who we picked up in a trade before last season, asking us about an extension. Definitely something that we would like to do. He's going to be a free agent this year. Issue is the money is obviously pretty high. He's looking for close to $40 million a year for 10 years. If there's anyone that we're going to give a contract like that to, I think it's somebody like Elijah Moore. All he did last year was hit .310, 52 homers, 129 ribbies, set a major league record with home runs in 9 consecutive games, and was named to his first All-Star or his second All-Star team and won his first Silver Slugger award. Not the greatest defensive player as a first baseman, and also not even the greatest defensive player as a corner outfielder, but that bat makes up for a lot of potential defensive sins. Don't think we're going to try to sign him right now. I actually don't even know if we could. Yeah, we've only got less than $30 million a year for extensions, so we would have to structure the deal very creatively to even be able to bring him on board right now. But certainly a player that I hope is with the Colorado organization for many years to come. But that may be off-season business between the beginning of the off-season and when he can actually file for free agency, that we try to get done when we have a little better knowledge as to what our financial situation is going to look like next season and who we're actually going to have on the books. You know, we've got some arbitration eligible players looking to make some big money that could be coming off the books, and who knows what we're going to do as far as trades also. So certainly hope that we will bring Elijah Moore back, but I don't think that's a contract that we're going to really actively pursue during the season at around $40 million a year. And the month of April is now in the books with a 20-11 record as of May 1st. That means we went, 19-8 in the month of April. So a really good month for the Rockies. Elijah Moore, who we were just talking about, National League Batter of the Month, 344, 10 homers, 26 ribbies. Obviously will be critical to bring him back. And they did note if he keeps putting numbers like that up, he could be hauling in a big wad of cash at this time next year. I think there is no doubt at all about that. And our new addition, Rogelio Loera, National League Pitcher of the Month, held batters to a 144 average, 55 strikeouts in 38 innings, and a 2.84 ERA over the month of April. For the year, he's 4-2 with a 3.74 ERA after that rough debut at the end of March. But he is certainly doing everything that we could have hoped for at this point. The goal is to keep him healthy. Kind of interesting, although Robbie Carrillo is leading the league in batting average, our former first baseman Jamel Cohen, having a really big year with Atlanta, ended up signing for almost $20 million with them. We did have an option at $18 million for him, but he's hitting .347 with 9 homers, 22 ribbies in his first 98 at-bats with the Braves. So he remains extremely effective. We know that obviously Moore, who is our first baseman, is putting up perhaps even a better season overall. But Cohen's still doing really well. Have to check in and see how the youngster, Mr. Fields, is doing. Isn't a total replacement for Cohen, but certainly is the guy who we felt let us most directly move on from him. He's been primarily a DH for us against right-handed pitching, and he's hitting .271 with 4 homers and 19 ribbies and 96 at-bats. So not having quite as good a year as Cohen at this point, but for almost $19 million a year less and being a decade younger, I think it was still the right decision to move on from Cohen and start giving some at-bats to Fields. Take a look at the team statistics. As I mentioned, after the 1-3 start in March, we ended up going 19-8 in April. We're actually a little better than our Pythagorean record. As usual, thank you, Coors, first in most batting categories. Interestingly, we're only 4th in home runs, though, which is a bit surprising. But first in the National League in runs scored with 167. We're 12th in runs allowed with 140, so actually that's a little bit worse than we were, I believe, a year ago when we finished up the season. But our starters ERA has gotten down to 8th. The bullpen ERA is actually not quite as impressive. Taking a quick look at the pitchers, we've already talked about Loera. Alvarado and Vasquez and Javi Toledo, all good in the case of Toledo to respectable in the case of Alvarado and Vasquez. Juan Vargas with a 3-2 record is the second winningest pitcher on our team behind Loera, but his ERA is approaching 6. So perhaps he's getting closer to a point where he's going to be needing to move into that relief role that we talked about, maybe an option for him over the next few years now that we've got him signed to a longer deal. But the team is 20-11 right now. No need at all to make any impetuous moves at this point, in my opinion. And you can see when you look at the 12 pitchers who we do have on the pitching staff, and we're going with 12 because we've built a staff that all has really good stamina. You can see at this point, everyone on our pitching staff now has ground ball or extreme ground ball tendencies. That's something that we've been focused on over the last couple of years. And this past off season, we did clear out the last couple of guys who were neutral as far as their tendencies. Think that guys who keep the ball on the ground give us the best potential for success in this park, particularly when we have a excellent defensive shortstop like Mr. Casares locked up, and he's still hitting pretty productively this year, 266 average. If we get that type of batting average out of him with that glove, we would be very pleased. And the first couple of weeks of May, quite honestly, not going quite as well. You can see the record slipped to 24-17. Went on a 4-game losing streak against the Nationals and then starting out against the Dodgers, although we did win 2 in a row on the road at Chavez Ravine to salvage that series. But taking a look at the standings, the Padres, who traded away Mr. Vasquez to us in this past offseason, still doing pretty well without him. You can see the NL West thus far is incredibly loaded. 4 teams with .575 or better winning percentages. We are a game and a half out in the division, up half a game on the wild card against both of our other divisional foes. So the NL West appears to be loaded, although bit of a surprise. The Diamondbacks are one of the teams that's in competition, and they, I believe, have the most stretched finances of any team in the division. Yeah, they definitely do, because with the 30th budget in baseball, they have the most stretched finances of any team in baseball. So interesting to see them being really competitive with the big market Padres, Dodgers, and the big market Giants, even though they're not really doing much right now, as well as our Rockies team, which is now, high end of the middle market, 11th in terms of our budget at this point. But there is a lot of money in the NL West when we look at teams. Padres with the biggest budget in baseball at $380 million. The Dodgers, who have gotten more resurgent over the last couple of years, 9th with a payroll of $318 million, or a budget of $318 million. And then maybe the Giants have slipped back a bit. No, they're still 7th in budget at $330 million. So a lot of money out west at this point, with 4 of the top 11 budgets in the National League West Division here in this 2052 season. And unfortunately, the young star outfielder Bobby Perez is going to be out another couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, additionally with those back spasms. We'll check on quickly on a couple of the young guys that have been getting playing time in his absence. Bobby Mata, this past off-season's Rule 5 acquisition, hitting just .224 in 49 at-bats. He's making the jump from A to the majors, just basically trying to survive this year with him on the roster and have him not be too much of a problem for us, but think he is a player who, with, as I talked about earlier, that contact and gap power, could be a pretty productive player down the line in cores. Manlio Milinhos also getting more playing time with the injury to Perez. He's hitting .299. Also no home runs in 107 at-bats, but has been a pretty close to league average type of offensive player. Honestly, his batting profile is similar to the one that Mata has. So we've got 2 potentially really good contact hitters in our outfield going forward with those two in our system. And then last but not least, Jose Brito, who was our Rule 5 pick back in 2048, our first year of this playthrough. Has not done much since he came up. 077, only 13 at-bats, though, getting a little bit of playing time because of the injury to Perez. And the month of May definitely has not been as good for the Rockies. We're 32-22 here in the final days of the month. Still in first place in the division, but certainly have not been as dominant in the month of May as we were in April. Do have a 2-game lead on the Padres at this point. We've been mediocre, but they've been bad at 2-8 over the last 10. But another potentially big injury for our team, excellent defensive center fielder Tony Padilla, going to be out with a strained MCL for 6 weeks. So that's going to hurt our outfield defense, which is a big part of what I think has made our pitching staff more effective the last few years. Padilla hitting .292 with 10 home runs, so in addition to being an excellent defensive center fielder, he's also a pretty good offensive player. You can see he hit 33 home runs for us a couple of years ago while batting over 300. Slipped back a bit last season, and this year is kind of not as good as he was in 2050, but better than he was in 2051. He's wrecked physically, so it doesn't shock us when he gets hurt. Certainly going to put a little crimp in our style to have now 2 of our starting outfielders on the IL, although it looks like Bobby Perez, hopefully, unless he has another setback, is close to getting back. We do have some optionality. Robbie Carrillo, who we brought on in that trade with St. Louis about a year and a half ago, is certainly capable of playing center field, although we have moved him into left field because we believe that Padilla is a little bit better overall defensively with a higher range. And having Carrillo in left just gives us an incredible defensive outfield when everyone is healthy, including Perez in right. So we can potentially move Carrillo into center field. The other option is Danny Ruiz, the super utility player, hitting .262 for us this year. Only 3 home runs and 168 at-bats. But he is really good defensively in the infield, and also certainly has the range to play center field for us at well. So we've got a couple options there. Clearly would prefer not to be missing Padilla for the next 6 weeks, but it is what it is at this point. So we've now made it to the end of May. We're still in first place, but a 33-25 record. We've definitely slipped back over the last month. Financially, things are going well, though. We ended up selling about 1,600 more season tickets than a year ago, and you can see our attendance is up about 900 a game. So revenue up close to 10% a game, even though our ticket prices are up only around 8%. So that is positive so far. Fan interest has deteriorated a bit, no longer 100 plus, down to 99. Hopefully, if we play a little better in the month of June, we can avoid further deterioration there. But looking at the team statistics, May was not great. 13-14 record. Only good news is that we're in first place, but we're actually second in the National League in runs scored. Going to be real interesting to figure out who's got a better offense than us. So the offense maybe has deteriorated a bit since last year. We talked about that being a possibility with the losses of Gonzalez and Cohen and Nakahara, and the fact that we really focused on our pitching staff this offseason. Still, obviously, a very good offense, but even in our first year with the Rockies, when we won only 74 games, we led the National League in runs scored. So we just have felt a little bit that by our birthright of playing half of our games in cores, we should always be leading the National League in runs scored with this team, and maybe that's not our birthright. Overall runs allowed tied for 9th. That's really good. 6th in starters ERA, so the big investments this offseason in Loera and Vasquez definitely paying off. 9th in bullpen ERA, but both of those numbers, as well as the overall runs allowed, moving in the right direction recently. Defensive efficiency and zone rating, a little disappointing given the focus that we've paid on our defense. But it is what it is at this point. I think that we've got pretty good defensive players at most positions. Maybe we'll get a little more effective over the second half of the season. Actually, more than the second half of the season. We're only 58 games into the year right now. We're right on target with our Pythagorean record and where we should be in the standings. And we're up a game and a half on the Dodgers now, so things normalizing a little bit. The lower budget Diamondbacks back to fourth place and barely over 500 at this point. But I think it was a month ago that every team in the division, or all four of these teams that are now above 500, had winning percentages of 575 or better. So it's been a bit of a rough month, not just for the Rockies, but for everybody else in the division in terms of our one-lost record. And the good news is we start the month of June is that we do have Bobby Perez back. We sent him on a quick rehab assignment to Albuquerque where he played a couple of games for us, did hit a solo homer. Think that hopefully having him back in the lineup will give our offense a little bit of a boost. Padilla going to be gone until probably around the All-Star break at this point. We have kept Carrillo in left field. And we did move the extremely versatile Danny Ruiz to become our starting center fielder for the next few weeks. And Perez in his first game back. The good news is that we won a twin bill against the Diamondbacks, but he got suspended 5 games for his role in a bench-clearing brawl his first game back. So probably not exactly what we were looking for from Bobby, but he'll be back in a week. And as we get to mid-June, Rockies still in first place, 43-32. Taking a look at the standings. Up 2.5 on the Dodgers, 3 on the Padres, so not really too much different. We have lost 3 in a row, which tightens up the divisional race a little bit at this point. Did get some really good news, though. Our youngster, Adam Fields, NL Player of the Week, 13 for 31, 419 average, and 4 homers. And it looks like that home run bat is starting to develop a little more like the way that we had hoped it would. Got his batting average up to 285 this year, but most importantly, 14 home runs and 253 at-bats. So I think he's doing a pretty good proxy for Jamel Cohen, although let's take a look at the standings. I didn't see whether Cohen was he's still leading the NL in hitting at this point, which for a guy with a 50 contact, a little bit surprising. But he's hitting 348 with 20 homers and just 210 at-bats with the Braves. So he's been really productive there. But still, as I talked about earlier, the fact to have a player like Fields who's making almost $19 million less, who's giving us a lot of the production that we used to get from Cohen, I think that was definitely the right move to make, since it also is the move that allowed us to bring on Mr. Loera, who's now 7-5 with a 4.15 ERA, 3.6 WAR, 1.89 Sierra. So, although Coors has had a negative impact on his numbers with 130 strikeouts in 84 2/3 innings, that brilliant Sierra and a FIP minus of 49. The ERA plus playing in Coors is not going to be what it's been in the past for him, but all of the kind of secondary or more advanced metrics indicate that Mr. Loera remains an extremely effective major league pitcher. Taking a look broadly at the rotation, Vargas is the one who continues to struggle. Alvarado and Toledo have their ERAs under 4, Vasquez in the mid-4s. Vargas 3-7, though, with a 5.94 ERA. Again, for the amount of money that we signed him to with this extension, average of $2.8 million a year for the next 3 years, don't think it's a contract that's going to hurt us. But if there is an opportunity to eventually bring on a big-time right-handed starting pitcher and move Vargas to become more of a reliever for us, I think that may be what we need to do. We did, with his contract for the extension, we did not promise him any role because we knew that we would potentially be wanting to move him into the bullpen. So He has been promised a starting role for this year back from our original contract with him, but hopefully if we do move him into the pen, certainly after this year, it won't be a big problem in the clubhouse or with his attitude. I hope. And as we get into late June, we've gotten to our midseason review of our goals. 48-35 record, which still puts us 2.5 clear of the Padres in the West. The Dodgers are 4 back. 578 winning percentage behind the Braves, second best in the National League, and third best in baseball behind both the Blue Jays and the Braves. So it's been a solid year, not as spectacular as I may have hoped thus far. Looking at ownership's goals, he believes we're the player who will lead our team to the playoffs, but we really need to turn things around during the second half of the year. I think that's a little melodramatic. As I just noted, we've got the third best record in baseball and we're leading our division. Defensive efficiency hasn't improved. I think that's fair. Pleased with our attendance. Happy with our progress towards our goals and the final evaluation coming up at the end of the season. Taking a look at the top 100 prospects, still one Rocky on the list. The young left-hander Elijah Smith, who we picked third overall back in 2050 when we got extremely lucky in the draft lottery. He is in high A ball this year, 3.75 ERA, 5-2 record. I think it may be time to move him up to Double A. Let's take a look. It says he's not quite ready, but the green arrows are not always the best indication of that. The fact that he's got close to major league stuff, movement and control, and 4 major league or close to major league quality pitches indicates he's probably ready for Double A, as does a 5-2 record with a 3.75 ERA, a 2.93 Sierra. Don't think there's really any reason to keep him in there unnecessarily long. Do just want to check in briefly. I think that right now we've got a good relationship with him and the pitching coach, and just want to make sure that that's not something that's going to be materially different. Yeah, he's got an excellent relationship with his pitching coach in high A ball right now. What's he expected to have when we move him up to Double A with Jake Krezemski? Also expected to have an excellent relationship with him. Krezemski is outstanding at teaching pitching, legendary in development, excellent in mechanics. So I don't think there's anything to be too concerned about from that front. So we're going to move Elijah Smith up to Double A ball, our top prospect. Yeah, it's not saying that he's not ready here. So we're going to continue to move the 21-year-old up through the system. And, he could definitely be someone who's helping us in the not-so-distant future. Unfortunately, he's another lefty. And also does not have ground ball tendencies, but I think that when you look at the potential profile of Mr. Smith, we're willing to deal with the fact that he might not necessarily be a perfect Coors pitcher, but because we think he's going to be pretty effective just about anywhere. Our other big starting pitching prospect is also in Double A, Cameron Miller, who's about a year and a half older. 2-5 this year with a 4.68 ERA after we moved him up from A and high A where he spent last year. So he hasn't been quite as effective, but still a big-time prospect for us without a doubt. And we've now simmed ahead to July 1st, 51-36 record, 586 winning percentage, still second best in the National League behind the Braves, and third best in baseball behind the Braves and the Blue Jays. 2 games up on the Padres, 5.5 up on the Dodgers. Elijah Moore third in the NL in ribbies at this point. Rogelio Loera tied for the league lead in wins with 10, running away with the league lead in strikeouts with 154, as he has done over the course of his career, and leading the National League with a 4.4 pitcher WAR. So he has definitely met all expectations for us thus far. Not going to put up the same ERA that he's put up in previous stops, pitching half his games in cores, but has still been very effective for us. Take a look quickly at the team statistics. Did bounce back nicely in June with an 18-11 record. 51-36, or actually a game worse than we would be expected. Back to first in the National League in runs scored, and you can see first or second in just about every offensive category. Have slipped back to 10th in runs allowed, but our starter and bullpen ERAs are both 8th. Would certainly love to be a little better in runs allowed. If we can get close to average in the National League, if we could get to 8th, which would obviously be perfectly average, or even 9th, I feel like we're going to be in really good shape. Defensive efficiency and zone rating still pretty mediocre, maybe slightly above average in zone rating, a bit below average in defensive efficiency. So overall, it's been a solid start to the season. I can't complain about a team that's in first place by 2 games with the second best record in the league, but clearly with that simulation we ran right before the season start that said that we were going to be a potentially 107 win team, have to feel a little disappointed with our performance on the field thus far. Fortunately, outside of those 2 big injuries to Bobby Perez and Tony Padilla, the team's been pretty healthy, particularly our starting pitchers. Padilla looks like he should be back before the end of the week, which is positive. So a couple last things we're going to do before finishing up the episode. Check in on the international amateur free agents, and then we're also going to do a quick review of the stats for all of our key players, just to see who we may need to be thinking about making some changes with as we get closer to the trade deadline, which will be at the end of this month. Do have a little over $3 million to potentially take on some free agent contracts. And you can see our money for extensions has shrunk. So yeah, that's because guys like Danny Ruiz playing full-time are seeing their arbitration numbers climb over the course of the season so far. So obviously we would love to end up figuring out a way to get Elijah Moore signed to an extension, but realistically it's probably going to be more of a beginning of the off-season type of activity for us. And for international amateur free agents, and this is something that for those of you who have seen the OOTP 24 trailer, looks like it's going to be a little more nuanced, and you're going to be able to do a little more building relationships with players before you get to international amateur free agency, and get a little more direct scouting of some of these players before international amateur free agency in the new version. So I think that'll be a really nice addition. Quick look based on what our scout thinks. 2 or 3 guys who really stand out. Tony Lepay, young catcher, durable, nice home run power, just doesn't really have the defensive profile I'd like for a perfect catcher, but that power bat and the durability would both play really well. Second baseman Adrian Ortega, not that great defensively for a second baseman, but another guy with potentially excellent contact and really good home run power. Mart Timmer from Aruba, another young catcher, pretty average defensively, pretty average offensively. Not really thrilled about any of these prospects. I mean, I think they're all fine. We'll certainly make an offer for somebody, but it doesn't look like there's anyone that's a true rock star from my perspective among the batters. Maybe Alvin Luna will be the guy, although at 18 he's a bit old for an international amateur free agent, but we don't have a great scouting report on the 18-year-old Venezuelan. Certainly looks like he could be a effective major league starter if he completely develops. Doesn't have the ground ball tendencies we like. His movement is fine if he fully develops. So he's not a horrible prospect. Tony Molina doesn't really excite me. Seems to me perhaps a bit of a down year for the international amateur free agents. Adrian Ortega, don't really love playing him in the outfield either, so he's really just a pure bat at this point. Does have a little bit of speed. Certainly a guy who can hit the ball, no doubt about that. Tony Lepe. I just don't know about a catcher that is average in terms of his catcher ability with a well below average arm. That, although catching it does not appear from my experience to be as important in OOTP 23 as it was in 22, I still don't know that I feel great about that. So I'm going to spend a little more time with the prospects and let you know what I decide. And I think I am going to make my initial offer to the second baseman, Adrian Ortega. Just think with that contact and home run power and decent speed, he can be an acceptable gap power. He can be a pretty productive offensive player, even though he doesn't necessarily have a position you feel great about playing him at. Being 5'10", not even going to be an ideal first baseman. So he's a very mediocre to below average defensive second baseman, a first baseman who doesn't have the greatest reach and range by virtue of his size, or a DH. But the bat is interesting enough that I think we'll go that way. If Ortega doesn't work out and we have to go to a fallback, I think I'm going to go with the young, very odd Finnish prospect, Toni Kolari, mainly because I just think he's got one of the higher ceilings of any of these prospects, even though he's only 16 years old. Has a great personality with that high work ethic, intelligence, and adaptability. Should develop and hopefully reach his full potential. Has the defensive abilities to be a competent player at multiple positions in the infield, and has enough of a bat to be a respectable major league player, I believe. Really, if we have to go to Kolari as a fallback, I really just view him as maybe 6, 7, 8 years from now being a pretty nice utility infielder for us. But I think that there is a pretty high probability that he will reach that floor of being a nice utility infielder for us. So if he's still available and Ortega doesn't work out, I tend to think that Kolari will be the direction that we can go. Mr. Ortega looking for the full $5 million. We will meet his demand and submit that offer to him. Now, taking a look at how the individual players are performing, we've talked a lot about Loera, 10-5, 4.05 ERA. Dave Alvarado, 3.93 ERA. Jose Vasquez, 4.26, and Javi Toledo, 3.79. All those guys definitely doing their jobs. Juan Vargas has definitely been struggling this year with that 6.17 ERA. He's been a pretty effective pitcher for us his first 2 years with us, so we're definitely willing to give him some more time. Still think that he's got really good movement on his pitches, still has those extreme ground ball tendencies, ground baller pitcher type. His SIERA of 4.47 isn't great, but it's certainly significantly better than his actual ERA. Again, if we find a brilliant right-handed starter that we can bring on over the next month, Vargas, to me, is the guy that we would clearly move to the bullpen, but not ready to force it right now. Ricky Rios is closer, 15 saves, 4.99 ERA, so has not been optimal in cores. Chase Crawford, Darius McLeod, and the lefties Victor Fields and Latrell Young all have ERAs well below 4, though. In the case of Young, below 3. Ethan Mingo, 4.5 ERA, and Will Lucio, 2.66. So for guys who are pitching half of their games in cores, feel that the starting rotation and the bullpen are both performing pretty well thus far in 2052. Turning to our everyday players, Alex Alvarez, glad we gave him the opportunity to become our starting catcher. Obviously very good defensively, and hitting 277 this year. 6 homers and 253 at-bats, so not the same type of power that we got from him when he was our backup last year. But if he is a close to average offensive player with that excellent catcher ability, feel real good about what he can do to help our pitching staff. Chris Rodriguez is the backup catcher, a guy that we had in our minor league system that we gave the opportunity this year to this year, hitting only 159 with 1 homer and 69 at-bats. He's a guy who maybe we look to upgrade that backup catcher position over the next month or so. Adam Fields, we've talked about him in the past, 286 average, 16 homers now. Very nice Jamel Cohen proxy for us at much lower price. Elijah Moore, 275, 22 homers, 70 driven in, 2.6 WAR on the season, which is one of the best numbers on our team. Tony Caceres as our utility infielder, been a little disappointing, hitting a $197 with a negative WAR. Rogelio Terrazas has played and started at second and short for us at times this year, primarily as second baseman at this point, hitting 309, 3 home runs. Jose Brito, 279 in limited action. Alex Ortega, the third baseman, kind of having a typical Alex Ortega year, 256 average, 16 homers, 61 ribbies, 1.4 WAR. Jordan Casares has been a little disappointing at shortstop recently. The batting average has plunged down to 234, and you can see his WAR is barely positive at this point. So hopefully we get a little more out of him. As we talked about, I really like the glove. Did not expect him to be a 317 hitter for us, given his batting profile, but certainly was hopeful that he'd be more than a 234 hitter for us also. So hopefully he'll bounce back a little bit with the bat. Robbie Carrillo leads the team with a 3.7 WAR, at least among our everyday players, 315, 19 homers, 54 ribbies for the left fielder. Bobby Mata, the Rule 5 guy, hitting 301, does have a home run for us now. Manlio Milquinos, a former Rule 5 guy, batting average just 247, has had 181 at-bats, so I'd have to say that's a little bit disappointing given his batting profile and his speed, even though he's not going to hit a ton of home runs, and we're fine with that based on the fact that he hit 343 for us in 2050 and hit 330 in Double-A last year. The 247 average, given his profile, is a little bit disappointing at this point. Danny Ruiz, 289 average, 10 homers, 37 ribbies, close to a 2 WAR for us. Started out as a second baseman for us, has been filling in at center field for the last month plus since the injury to Mr. Padilla. This is just an incredibly valuable player with a plus bat and can play very good to excellent defense at just about every position on the field. Would love to keep him around for many years to come, but his arbitration number is getting pretty high, looking for about $15 million likely next year. His arbitration number around $13.6 million. As we talked about earlier, that's one of the arbitration numbers that has increased this year given his increased playing time and his good performance. And then Bobby Perez obviously had the year negatively impacted by that injury early, but starting to do more what we would expect from him with a 283 average and 7 homers and 145 at-bats. Expect hopefully the home runs to start coming in bunches as the weather heats up, but the 283 average from him is certainly a little higher than we'd expect, quite honestly, but happy to see that type of production. So all in all, it's been a nice, solid start to the season for our Rockies. As we've talked about, we're leading the division, second best record in the National League. And with the exception of Padilla, everyone is healthy and well. So we'll see how things go over the next month. We'll see whether there are any players that we can potentially bring on in trade to help us. Take a quick look at the trading block now. Still a little early here on July 1st for it to be completely filled with potential players. Bobby Rivera is a guy that was mentioned in the comments of our last episode by Three Quarters Badger as a guy maybe we should have looked at this past off season, and we did look at him. As I mentioned, the reason I moved on from him, even though his profile is pretty good, was just the poor personality. But he could potentially be an upgrade for us at backup catcher. Just don't know if that's the way to go or not. Clearly, pitcher would be the area where if we can find a right-handed starter, that might be where we can find a difference maker. Don't know that there's that type of pitcher out there quite yet. Jose Natal, out with shoulder inflammation for 5 weeks. No thank you. But Cesar Soto, if we're going to go for a veteran, does have pretty good movement on his pitches. 37 years old. Oof, he's fragile in terms of his injury proneness. But a ground baller with extreme ground ball tendencies. Great movement on his pitches. He's got another year at $20 million next year. I wouldn't be averse to bringing on a fragile right-hander. Actually, he's not a right-hander, though. He's another left-hander. Sorry, I missed that. You probably like yelling at me, hey, dope, he's another lefty. All right, well, that makes it easy. I do like his pitching profile, but being a left-hander, don't know how that works. Alex Hihar is a guy we've looked at in the offseason the last couple years. You can see now he's out with a partially torn UCL. The reason we haven't brought him on board is that he doesn't really have those ground ball tendencies we've been looking for, and obviously not going to go there with his injuries right now. I don't know that we would bring Stephen Moore back, another guy that doesn't have ground ball tendencies and pitched to a 6.75 ERA before we traded him away a few years ago. So Natal could be the guy. He doesn't have a great personality, but an extreme ground baller who throws in triple digits, good movement on his pitches, right-hander. Don't love that his fastball and his sinker are average-ish to slightly above average, but his splitter is so good that I think he can probably be an effective major league starter. Not going to go a ton of innings. He's not making any money at all, and he's wrecked physically, and he's going to be out for another month. I think I'm just going to take a quick look before finishing up the episode as to exactly what the Pirates might be looking for him, and that'll allow you guys to tell me whether I might be crazy or not to potentially bring him on board. Yeah, and in a straight-up trade, the Pirates, ridiculous, looking for Carrillo, Moore, or Jose Vasquez is the only players they would take straight up for a wrecked 32-year-old who's out for another 5 weeks. So they seem a bit unrealistic in those demands. So certainly not something that we're going to pursue right now. If we get closer to the end of the month and it looks like he's closer to getting completely healthy, and there's not any other right-handed pitchers who could start that are out there on the market, and we're in a situation where Vargas is still really struggling, then maybe there's something to do with him. But certainly the price that the Pirates are looking for right now seems prohibitive, in my opinion. And with that, we'll finish up the episode. As I've talked about, a solid start to the season for our Rockies. Hopefully we can play even better over the second half of the year. In our next episode, we're going to dig into finishing up international amateur free agency, finding out who makes the all-star team, drafting some young talent to hopefully improve the roster in the future, and most importantly for the team this year, closing in on the trading deadline and figuring out if there's anyone who we can bring on who can help ensure that this Rockies team will make a long run in the postseason. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.